What if disappearing isn't losing? What if it's finally coming home to yourself? I remember sitting at a dinner table, surrounded by people whose laughter filled the room like music I couldn't dance to. I smiled so wide that my face ached. I nodded along to stories I didn't care about, laughed at jokes that didn't land in my heart, and agreed with things I didn't even believe. You have to be likable. You have to be easy to be around. You have to be careful not to take up too much space, not to speak too loudly, not to show too much, not to become too much. So I shrunk myself to fit. I played the part. I wore the right clothes. I said the right things. I stayed away from hard conversations. I gave pieces of myself away like party favors, hoping someone would finally clap for me, would finally say, "You belong here." But you know what happens when you spend your life performing? You don't disappear all at once. You disappear in fragments. You lose yourself in the moment you say, "It's fine," when it's not. You lose yourself in the moment you laugh when you really want to cry. You lose yourself every time you silence your truth just to keep someone else comfortable. It's this slow erosion, one small lie at a time, one tiny abandonment at a time. And the most dangerous part, it feels normal. You get used to it. You start believing that your job is to keep everyone else okay, even if it costs you your peace, even if it costs you. Psychologists call this self-abandonment. It's when you consistently choose the comfort of others over your own emotional safety. It's when you choose to be accepted instead of choosing to be real. You make yourself easy to love, but at the price of making yourself impossible to know. And here's what I learned the hard way. When you betray yourself just to belong, you still end up alone. You just end up with company. Eventually, you wake up and realize that you've become a stranger inside your own skin, that you've been decorating a life you're not even living, that the people around you love the character you've been playing, not the person you really are. And it's heartbreaking, because by the time you figure it out, you've spent years learning how to disappear in plain sight. But maybe, just maybe, the most courageous thing you can do is to stop performing, to stop begging for approval that costs you your authenticity, to stop chasing a version of yourself that never belonged to you in the first place. Maybe the bravest thing is to disappear, not from life, but from the spaces, conversations, and performances that taught you to hide. Maybe it's time to leave the stage, because you deserve to be fully present in your own life. You deserve to be fully known. You deserve to come back home to yourself. And maybe the people who truly see you, who really love you, were waiting for you to drop the act all along. I once sat in a friendship that only worked as long as I stayed small. I didn't realize it at first. It crept in quietly. It was the way I hesitated before I spoke, the way I watered down my opinions, the way I avoided saying what I really felt just to keep the peace. I became fluent in silence, not because I didn't have words, but because I learned over time that my words didn't feel welcome. There were moments I wanted to say, "This hurts me," but I swallowed it. Moments I wanted to say, "I need more from you," but I buried it. Moments I wanted to say, "I deserve to take up space," but I convinced myself that silence was safer, and I carried that silence like a survival kit. Because sometimes silence feels like the only thing you can control. Some people don't love you, they love your silence. They love your silence because your silence makes their life easier. They love the version of you that doesn't challenge them, doesn't ask for more, doesn't disturb the comfort they've built around themselves. And for a long time, I thought I was being kind. I thought I was being patient. I thought I was being strong by staying quiet. But you know what I was actually doing? I was abandoning myself. There's a brutal kind of loneliness in being surrounded by people who like the quiet version of you, but wouldn't know what to do with the real one. It's a loneliness that sits in your chest even when the room is full. It's the loneliness of being unseen. From a trauma perspective, we know that silence is often a learned survival response. When you grow up in spaces where your feelings are dismissed, or your needs are met with punishment or withdrawal, you learn quickly that silence is safer than speaking. But here's what no one tells you. Silence might keep you safe, but it will also starve you. It will starve your relationship. It will starve your self-worth. It will starve your sense of aliveness. Sometimes disappearing isn't about running away from people. It's about walking away from the places where your voice is not safe. It's about creating distance from the tables where your silence is a requirement for your seat. There comes a point when you realize that silence is no longer serving you. It's suffocating you. And you begin to understand that the cost of silence is too high. You can't afford to keep shrinking just to stay close to people who can only hold you when you're invisible. Walking away from those spaces isn't cruelty. It isn't bitterness. It isn't punishment. It's self-rescue. And if that means some people are uncomfortable with your absence, let them be. If that means some people will call you distant or difficult or selfish, let them. Because the people who love you for your silence are not the people who will celebrate your voice. The most radical thing you can do for your healing is to step back from spaces that feed on your silence. You are not here to be an echo. You are not here to be background noise in someone else's story. You are here to speak, to feel, to stand in the fullness of who you are without apology. And when you disappear from the conversations where your voice was never welcome, you don't lose connection. You finally begin to find it. I remember sitting in a relationship where I kept whispering to myself, maybe if I just give it one more chance. Maybe if I hold on a little longer. Maybe if I try just a little bit harder, things will finally change. It's almost terrifying how long we can convince ourselves to stay, how long we can live in the space between hope and reality, how long we can cling to the version of someone we wish they were instead of seeing the version that's actually standing in front of us. We don't talk about this enough. How staying can become its own form of self-betrayal. How endurance can be a quiet kind of death. We get so tangled up in what we've invested, the years, the memories, the emotional labor, that we forget to ask the simplest question. Is this still good for me? We glorify staying. We call it loyalty. We call it love. We call it commitment. But sometimes what we're actually doing is hanging on to a fantasy because facing the truth would break us. Sometimes we don't want to leave because leaving would mean we'd have to grieve the future we had planned. The wedding, the house, the growing old together, the story we were so sure was meant to be ours. It's a grief we don't always know how to hold. We say to ourselves, but we've been through so much. I've already poured so much of myself into this. It has to work. It has to get better. But here's the brutal, tender truth. The amount of time you've spent somewhere does not obligate you to stay. Time invested is not a life sentence. In psychology, there's something called sunk cost fallacy. It's this cognitive trap where we continue a relationship, a job, a friendship, not because it's working, but because we've already spent so much time or energy that walking away feels like failure. We don't want to waste what we've poured in. So we keep pouring, even if the cup has holes, even if nothing stays. The problem is, the longer we stay out of guilt, the more we lose ourselves in the process. We think leaving is cruel. We think staying is love. But sometimes, staying is the real betrayal. Because you betray the little voice inside you that's been whispering, "This is not enough for you." You betray your own needs. You betray your own growth. You betray your own potential for real joy, for honest connection, for peace. And here's the hardest thing to swallow. Sometimes we stay because we're addicted to potential, because the version of them we've built in our minds is kinder, more loving, more capable than the one who's actually there. We don't fall in love with people, we fall in love with their possibility. And that is what despair does. But living in potential will drain you. Because potential doesn't hug you when you're crying. Potential doesn't show up for the hard conversations. Potential doesn't choose you, not really. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is to let go of what you wanted it to be and tell yourself the truth about what it actually is. Leaving isn't giving up. Leaving isn't weakness. Leaving is often the moment you finally choose yourself. And if that means starting over, if that means sitting in silence, if that means grieving what could have been, let it. There is no prize for surviving spaces that are killing your spirit. There is no trophy for how long you can tolerate being unseen, unheard, or unloved. You are not meant to endure your way through life. You are meant to live, to feel joy, to be loved in ways that don't require you to shrink. And maybe, just maybe, when you finally walk away, you'll realize the only thing you were ever missing was your own permission to let go. I remember the first time I chose to disappear. It wasn't loud. It wasn't some grand announcement or dramatic exit. It was quiet, almost invisible. I stopped texting first. I stopped forcing conversation. I slipped out of group chats in the middle of the night, not because I was angry, but because I was exhausted from pretending I wasn't. I started pulling back, not to punish anyone, but because I finally realized I had been stretching myself thin just to keep connections that weren't nourishing me anymore. At first, it felt like grief. I would sit alone and question everything. Did I make a mistake? What if they forget me? What if no one notices I'm gone? The silence was deafening in those early days. I didn't know what to do with it. I'd become so used to filling my time, my phone, my mind, my heart with other people's noise that I didn't know how to live without it. But slowly, something unexpected happened. The silence that once felt suffocating started to feel like oxygen. The solitude that once felt like punishment began to feel like a gift. There is a sacred season where you must disappear, not because you hate the world, not because you're bitter, but because you need to hear yourself again. Because you've spent so long lost in the noise of other people's expectations, other people's timelines, other people's definitions of success, love, and happiness, that you've forgotten what your own voice sounds like. When you step back, when you go silent, when you enter this sacred season of isolation, it's like peeling away the layers that never belonged to you. You realize how many of your choices were made just to be accepted. You realize how many of your dreams were borrowed from someone else's vision. You realize how many of your shoulds were planted there by a world that never asked what you really wanted. In psychology, this is the power of voluntary solitude. It's not the loneliness we fear. It's the intentional space where you finally meet yourself. Raw, honest, without distraction. We're so quick to avoid this season. We jump into rebound friendships. We binge on entertainment. We fill every empty moment so we never have to feel the ache of being alone. But here's what I've learned. Avoiding solitude delays your healing. Rushing to fill the silence with noise only postpones the truth. When you choose to disappear for a season, You make room to sort out what's actually yours and what you've been carrying just to keep other people comfortable. You start to notice the habits that were numbing you. You start to hear the stories you've been telling yourself on autopilot. You start to sit with the grief you've buried under busyness. It's uncomfortable, it's tender, it's slow, but it's the most honest work you will ever do. Because when you step into isolation with intention, you don't just come back the same person who left. You come back grounded. You come back clearer. You come back unwilling to trade your peace for anyone's approval. And not everyone will understand your disappearing act. Some will think you're distant. Some will think you've changed. Some will even resent you for stepping away from roles you were never meant to carry forever. But that's not your burden to hold. The sacred season of isolation is not about making sense to others. It's about making sense to yourself. It's about choosing peace over performance. It's about building a life that feels like home, not one that just looks good from the outside. And when you finally return, you'll carry something unshakable, a sense of self that doesn't wobble in the presence of other people's expectations, a sense of peace that doesn't beg to be understood, because sometimes the deepest healing is found not in the arms of others, but in the quiet room where you finally sit with yourself and whisper, "You are enough. Even here, even now, even alone." There's something no one really prepares you for the moment you come back, after the disappearing, after the silence, after the sacred season of isolation where you wrestled with your ghosts and sat face to face with the version of yourself you had been running from. People think you'll come back the same. They expect you to slip comfortably back into the roles you once played, to laugh at the same jokes, to pick up the conversations right where you left them. They expect you to be familiar. But the truth is, you won't be. When you return, after disappearing, you're unrecognizable. Not because you changed your hair, not because you dress differently, not because you learned some fancy new language of self-help, but because the weight you used to carry isn't sitting on your shoulders anymore. You don't hustle for approval in the same way. You don't chase proximity to people who can't hold you. You don't trade your peace for belonging. You walk differently. You speak slower, more intentionally. You ask better questions. You no longer perform for a seat at a table you've outgrown. And this makes people